Before Joseph Bonanno, before Carmine Galante, there was the Maranzano crime family. The Gumbadas of Castellammare del Golfo. The story of this brigade begins in a sleepy port town on the coast of Sicily by the name of Castellammare del Golfo. Castellammare del Golfo is a town and municipality in the Trapani province of Sicily. The name can be translated as Sea Fortress on the Gulf, stemming from the medieval fortresses in the harbor. The nearby body of water, conversely, takes its name from the town and is known as the Gulf of Castellammare. It was in this sea fortress on the Gulf that on July 1st, 1886, Salvatore Maranzano would be born. Salvatore Maranzano was the youngest of 12 children born to Domenico Maranzano and Antonina Piscotta. However, tragedy was a huge part of young Salvatore's family life, as only 6 of his siblings, including himself, survived into adulthood. As he grew older, early dreams of joining the priesthood gave way to the constant influence of the mafia on young Salvatore. Early on, he caught the attention of powerful Sicilian godfather Don Vito Cascioferro and went to work for the powerful mobster. From Castellammare to America. It was on the orders of Don Vito that Maranzano immigrated to the United States in the early 1920s, settling in Brooklyn, New York. Cascioferro, using Maranzano, wanted to make a bid for control of mafia operations in the United States. After Maranzano's arrival, he began growing a bootlegging business using a real estate company as his front. He soon became involved in prostitution and the illegal smuggling of narcotics. As his criminal enterprise grew, Maranzano knew he needed men he could trust in order to continue with expansion. To his way of thinking, the only men he could call upon were his Gumbadas from Castellammare del Golfo. Members of the Castellammare del Golfo clan, many of whom were blood relation, joined Maranzano in New York, and soon his organization rivaled the largest in the city. Prominent members of the Maranzano family to join him in New York included mobsters Joseph Bonanno, Carmine Galante, and Gaspar de Gregorio. Other members of Maranzano's organization, all of whom from Castellammare, included Buffalo boss Stefano Magaddino, Detroit powerhouse Gaspar Milazzo, and Philadelphia boss Salvatore Sabella. With the strength of his organization at its pinnacle, Maranzano was ready to assume the title of Capo di Tutti Capi, or Boss of Bosses. The rise of Giuseppe Masseria. During Maranzano's rise to power, a young mobster from the rival Morello clan named Giuseppe Masseria began his ascent within the New York City underworld. Giuseppe Masseria joined the Morellos early on and became instrumental during the Morello-D'Aquila War. He was also an excellent earner, making money for the family as a bootlegger and extortionist. As the D'Aquila family expanded into Morello territory, however, war was inevitable. As the D'Aquila-Morello War raged, Masseria survived multiple assassination attempts orchestrated by feared D'Aquila hitman Umberto Valenti. Surviving these attempts, Masseria then struck back, gunning down Valenti and severely weakening the D'Aquila family. Masseria's success battling the D'Aquila family gave him an air of invincibility and a strong reputation in the New York underworld. Sometime later, Morello would step aside, handing control of the family to Masseria. Morello would stay on to serve as underboss and would also later serve as consigliere when Salvatore Lucania, also known as Charlie Lucky Luciano, ascended to the position of underboss. Maranzano, however, with a powerful organization of his own, was ready to challenge Masseria for control of the New York underworld and the title of Capo di Tutti Capi. The Castellammarese War. The opening salvo in the war was fired from within the Masseria faction when on February 26, 1930, Masseria ordered the murder of an ally, Gaetano Reina. Masseria gave the job to a young Vito Genovese, who killed the mob boss with a shotgun later that day. Masseria's intent was to protect his secret allies, Tommy Gagliano, Tommy Lucchese, and Dominic the Gat Petrelli, who were publicly supporting Maranzano. This treachery, however, would come back to haunt him, as the Reina family then threw its support behind Maranzano. Just days later, Masseria would order the death of Gaspar Milazzo, a Castellammare native who was the president of Detroit's chapter of the Unione Siciliana. Masseria had reportedly been humiliated by Milazzo's refusal to support him in a Unione Siciliana dispute involving the Chicago outfit and Al Capone. Shortly thereafter, Maranzano loyalist Vito Bonventre became a target as well. This was because he and his crew began to threaten Masseria's domination over local extortion rackets. On July 15, 1930, Masseria would retaliate, gunning Bonventre down outside his garage. Maranzano would strike back on August 15, 1930, when Castellammare loyalists would gun down Masseria consigliere and founder of the Morello crime family, Giuseppe the Clutch Hand Morello. This was a huge blow to the Masseria faction. Without Morello's advice and experience to lean on, Masseria would find himself at a strategic disadvantage. For the first time, unable to see the treachery unfolding around him. After Reina's murder, Masseria had appointed Joseph Pinzolo to take over the ice distribution racket. However, on September 9th, the Reina family shot and killed Pinzolo at a Times Square office rented by Lucchese. After these two murders, the Reina crew formally joined forces with the Castellammare. In order to regain the initiative, Masseria ordered another audacious hit. On October 23, 1930, Castellammare ally Joe Aiello, president of the Chicago Unione Siciliana, was murdered in Chicago. Masseria saw this hit as a major victory in the war, perhaps blinding him to the derision forming in his own ranks. The turning of the tide, and a new boss of bosses. On November 5, 1930, the Aquila family boss and Masseria ally Alfred Mineo and Mineo's consigliere Steve Ferrigno were murdered on Maranzano's orders. After their deaths, Frank Scalise inherited control of the D'Aquila family and subsequently defected to the Maranzano faction. The Masseria faction continued to sustain heavy losses when on February 3, 1931, another important Masseria lieutenant, Joseph Catania, was gunned down, dying 2 days later from his wounds. Given the deteriorating situation, Masseria allies Luciano and Genovese started communicating with Castellammarese leader Maranzano. A deal was then struck based on which Luciano would arrange for Masseria to be murdered, and Maranzano would bring the Castellammarese war to an end. Shortly thereafter, on April 15, 1931, Masseria was killed at Nuova Via Tammaro, a restaurant in Coney Island, Brooklyn. While there are alternate theories, most believe, while they played cards, Luciano allegedly excused himself to the bathroom, with the gunmen reportedly being Anastasia, Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Ciro Terranova drove the getaway car, but legend has it he was too shaken up to drive away and had to be shoved out of the driver's seat by Siegel. Despite differing accounts, what is known is that Masseria died from gunshot wounds to the head, back, and chest, according to the autopsy. With Masseria dead and the war over, Maranzano organized the mafia in New York City using a clear structure and hierarchy by dividing the main Italian clans in New York into what is now called the Five Families. The new bosses of the Five Families of New York were to be Charlie Lucky Luciano, Joseph Profaci, Tommy Gagliano, Frank Scalise, and Salvatore Maranzano. Maranzano then called a meeting of all the crime bosses in Wappingers Falls, New York, where he declared himself Capo di Tutti Capi, or Boss of all bosses. Luciano's betrayal and the death of Salvatore Maranzano. Maranzano's reign as Capo di Tutti Capi was short-lived. Although Maranzano was slightly more forward-thinking than Masseria, Luciano had come to believe that Maranzano was even more greedy and hidebound than Masseria had been. On September 10, 1931, Maranzano was shot and stabbed to death in his Manhattan office by a team of Jewish triggermen recruited by Meyer Lansky. The team included Samuel Red Levine, Bo Weinberg, and Bugsy Siegel. It is widely believed that Samuel Red Levine and his hit team dressed as IRS agents to gain access to Maranzano's office. Once inside, they then executed the mobster. With both Maranzano and Masseria dead, Luciano and his supporters took the structure Maranzano had put forth and modified it. Now, instead of a boss of bosses, Luciano instituted a commission where each boss would have a vote. There would be some leadership changes as well. Frank Scalise would step aside and become underboss for new D'Aquila chief Vincent Mangano. Also, Joseph Bonanno would take the reins of the Maranzano family, then naming it after himself. Joe Bonanno would lead the family for the next 30 years, and to this day, it is still known as the Bonanno crime family.